Hello everybody, welcome back to another histology video. Today we'll be talking about question 23, which is the structure and function of the lung. So a basic overview, the main function of the lung is basically to facilitate gas exchange, where we can basically exchange, take in oxygen and remove carbon dioxide, which is a waste product, and then that oxygen can be used for energy production, for example. But the main thing is that the lungs are split into two main bronchus that enters through the hilum. And then after a few more divisions, it becomes the bronchial tree. And then after a few more divisions, it becomes the alveolar tree. After that, the alveolar tree will then contain the alveolar tree, sorry, will contain the respiratory bronchioles, the alveolar ducts, and the alveolar sacs. And then we also have the pulmonary alveoli, which contains the blood-air barrier where gas exchange takes place. We'll talk about that in the future slides. Now about the bronchial tree, um, again, we can split this into two parts, the conducting portion and the respiratory portion. So going from apical first, we'd have the bronchi, which can be split into primary, secondary, and tertiary. And then going more downwards, we have the bronchioles, which can split into terminal bronchioles. And then going more downwards, we'd have the respiratory portion, which we can split into the respiratory bronchioles, the alveolar ducts, the alveolar sacs, and also the alveoli. And yeah, this will be mainly seen in the future slides and histological slides. So this slide is very important because it contains most of the information that you need to know. So the bronchi can be split into different layers. So the first layer you'd have would be the tunica mucosa. The second layer would be the tunica muscularis, and the third layer would be the tunica adventitia. So what's important is that within each layer of the bronchioles, there contains different epithelium. For example, in common bronchioles, we'd have the pseudostratified columnar ciliated epithelium with goblet cells, and in the terminal bronchioles, we'd have the simple columnar ciliated epithelium. But however, something interesting is that it contains the clara or club cells, which secrete a surface active agent, also known as surfactant. Um, but I will explain why this is very important in the future slides and why some people get confused with another thing. But also most important is that the terminal bronchioles do not contain goblet cells. Same with the respiratory system, bronchiole, sorry. However, its epithelium will be further degraded down into simple cuboidal ciliated epithelium. And yeah, I highlighted a very important point that is in yellow. So basically, the number of ciliated cells will decrease in number, but the number of clara cells will basically increase in number with decreasing diameter. So basically going downwards, down the respiratory portion, you'd have that. And then the lamina propria mucosa is just a thin layer with elastic fibers. And just to recall, elastic fibers are produced by fibroblasts, and it mainly contains the two components, which are elastin and fibrillin. And then next, we also have the muscle layer, or tunica muscularis, and these are circular smooth muscle bundles. So they exhibit like involuntary muscle contractions, for example, people with asthma. They do not contain any serous mucus glands, and they do not contain any hyaline cartilage. Um, yeah, something extra about club cells or clara cells is that they secrete surfactant, but it also contains antimicrobial peptides, which contains like lysozymes or immunoglobulin A, which is very important for immune defense in the respiratory system. And in the next slide, you can see the histological slide of the clara cells. They're shaped as like dome shaped, and you can also see that on the apical border, you can see that there are some secretory granules seen. Now, this picture is very important because it helps me compartmentalize like what is present in each segment of the bronchial tree. Um, so like after the segmental bronchus, that is when you'd see clearly the most difference in the bronchioles, sorry. So for example, in the terminal bronchiole, you would not see any goblet cells, you would not see any serous mucus glands, and you would not see any hyaline cartilage. However, the epithelium would still be there, but you can see that it decreased or reduced in like size. And also same thing with the ciliated cells, it decreases. And when you get to the alveoli, there is no ciliated cells, and you get the gist. But yeah, this picture is very, very important to compartmentalize things. And then in this slide, it's just a lung slide. You can see that there's the tertiary bronchus, the terminal bronchus, and the artery. And you can also see the alveolus and the alveolar sac. Here is just another slide or view of the lung. You can see the terminal bronchus, the terminal bronchiole, which we'll discuss further in future slides. Now we have the bronchus. Since I didn't really explain about the bronchus, because we started with the bronchiole, I'll explain it right now. So the bronchus basically has a similar structure with the trachea, except that the rings are not, except that the hyaline cartilage are not structured in rings. However, they're structured in like cartilage plates. As you can see in these arrows, they're not ring shaped clearly. And it's also seen that the smooth muscles, like they occupy the full circumference of the bronchus. And over here on the right, it's just the layers of the bronchus. So you have the mucosa, the muscle layer, the submucosa, the cartilage, and also the adventitia. Now, but the bronchioles, something very important about it is that they do not have cartilage and they do not have any glands or serous mucous glands, as you can see in the previous picture with the diagram. But yeah, they're like 1 millimeter or less in diameter. And they contain the pseudostratified ciliated epithelium. However, as they go down, they gradually turn into simple columnar, but they're still ciliated. But in some cases, in very, very, very small bronchioles, their epithelium becomes simple cuboidal, but still ciliated, sorry. And yeah, there's some muscle layers over here, as I highlighted in the blue arrow. And here is just another slide of the bronchiole. You can see the adventitia, the smooth muscle, and the simple columnar ciliated cell. Next, we'd have the terminal bronchioles, except that the epithelium in this is different. It contains the ciliated cuboidal cells and also many, many low columnar non-ciliated cells. And on the surrounding tissue, you can also see that there are some alveoli seen. And in terminal bronchioles, like we explained before, there are Clara cells. So there's a picture of a Clara cell with the secretory granules. And now about the respiratory bronchioles. So after the terminal bronchioles branch into these respiratory bronchioles, you would have this. Then that would then further branch into the alveolar ducts and individual alveoli, as you can see here. But to put it simply, the respiratory bronchioles and the terminal bronchioles are not that much different in terms of structure, except that you'd see more like alveoli over here. And then you can see here that there's the alveolar duct, which then is like a route towards the alveolar sacs. And the alveolar sacs are basically like spaces that are surrounded by each surrounding alveoli. And individual alveoli, they're basically then used for gas exchange through the blood-air barrier. Sorry. Now about the alveolar septum. So basically we have pneumocytes type 1 and type 2. Pneumocyte type 1 just has a very important function for gas exchange. So that's basically where gas exchange occurs. And pneumocyte type 2 is basically where surfactant is released. So basically going back to club cells or Clara cells, they also release surfactant, but not to the amount of pneumocyte type 2. So pneumocyte type 2, they basically secrete more surfactant compared to club cells. And they're also different in location. For example, like club cells are in terminal bronchioles, whereas pneumocyte type 2s are in the alveolar septum. So that is very, very, very important to note because some people get confused. And then we can also talk about the endothelium, which is another layer. And it's also important to note that the capillaries and the alveolar septum are continuous. Again, they're continuous. And also with fibroblasts, it's present there too, along with myofibroblasts as well. And then we'd also have the elastic and reticular fibers seen, and we also have the macrophages, which are basically the immune defense of the lung or the respiratory system. And these are named as dust cells or corneophages, but most professors don't mind you using dust cells. So that is just that. And moving on to the next slide. Again, more with the alveolar septum, but here I just highlighted like the structural differences. So like in type 1, it's more like squamous shaped. So if you were to see a slide and it's more squamous, that would be type 1. And type 2 is more of a cuboidal shape. Type 2 are also progenitor cells of type 1, and type 1 are also incapable of cell division. Here is the blood-air barrier, and this, what I did was I just memorized it by heart, but if you were to think about it logically about the structure, it would make sense. So first, again, pneumocyte type 1, sorry, again, used for gas exchange, and then we have the fused basement membrane of the pneumocyte and the endothelial cell from the capillary, and then obviously at the end, we have the endothelial cell of the capillary, and on the right is just an electron microscope of what that would look like. And lastly, the pleura. So we have the parietal pleura and the visceral layer. Oh, sorry, the parietal layer and the visceral layer. So basically what it is that the parietal pleura lines like the inner surface of the thoracic cavity, and the visceral lines the outer surface of the lung. And in between these two layers, we'd have the pleural cavity. And in the pleural cavity, we'd have something known as pleural fluid. And again, to not mix it up, pleural fluid is not surfactant, and it's not produced by pneumocyte type 2. It is actually produced by mesothelium. So that is very important to note. And what mesothelium is that it's just basically one layer of simple squamous epithelium. And it's also like there's also loose connective tissue and collagen and elastic fibers to have like an elastic characteristic for recoil while breathing and all that. And that is basically it.